Hi, my name is Olajide Olagunju, and I am the author of How to Resolve a Conflict, which is the book in front of you. Uh, you are now in a lecture series, also titled How to Resolve a Conflict. And this is the 25th edition. This is lecture 25. The book has acted to now as our textbook for the lecture. So it's been our guide, and we'll continue where we stopped yesterday. Yesterday, we were looking at how to bring the mediation process to a close so that you have a mediated agreement. So the mediation ends with the signature of the parties. Today, I'd like us to look at forms of mediated agreement. Let me read a bit from the book and then we have our discussion. Whichever form the agreement takes, it must obviously incorporate the following. Who is to do what? When to do it? And what happens if it is not done? Who is to do what? When to do it? And what happens if it is not done? This way, each party's responsibility under the agreed solution will be clear, and there will be little room for confusion in implementation. Let's discuss that a bit. So the important thing is there's an agreement, and preferably written, so that we don't forget what we agreed to, and we don't, because of our forgetfulness, or one challenge or the other, descend back into the conflict. And I've stated here that all agreements, doesn't matter the form the agreement takes, even if it's an oral agreement, it must obviously incorporate these three things. One, this conflict that has been resolved. In the resolution process, who is to do what? That is, who is to carry out what task? Secondly, when should what has to be done? What has been agreed to be done? When should it be done? The time frame. We don't leave gaps. And finally, three, what happens if it is not done? So responsibility, timing, and the implication of non-feasance, of not doing what ought to be done by the person who is agreed to do it between the parties. Okay. So while we'll have it clearly spelled out in those frameworks, is to ensure that people don't fail in their responsibilities under the agreed solution. Everybody knows exactly and precisely what they have to do when they have to do it, and the result of their not doing it. Now, let me just explain why we need to put in the agreement, mediated agreement, why what happens if what has to be done is not done when it should be done. It's simply because the parties know in advance if there's a gap, if there's a failure to implement an assignment by either party, what will happen. So it's like I said, it brings clarity. It creates clarity. So it's not, there's no problem, even if there's an itch in implementation. Parties just look at the agreement. Okay, we had agreed in our military agreement last year that if there's a challenge with implementation, we will call our mediator. For example, if we have a challenge with implementation, we will do X, Y, Z. So it's very clear to the parties, binding on them, what the implication of not of something that is required to be done in the agreement, the implication of it not being done. So stating what happens if it's not done, it's not really necessarily the meat of the agreement, but it preserves the agreement. It preserves the sanctity of the agreement. It keeps everybody in shape and in order, and so we don't start looking for a way out when the problem or challenge with implementation arises. We already know from the first day the agreement is signed what would happen if the agreement has some challenges. It becomes challenging to implement it, if at all. Now let's read on. The agreement reached may take the form of a simple agreement, a deed, a consent judgment, and or a consent award. For the sake of those of us who are not lawyers or knowledgeable in these in contracts, there are basically three forms of agreement. An oral agreement is an agreement, it's binding, generally binding, all things being equal. Then you have a simple agreement, just on a piece of paper, it's written. That's another form of agreement, a simple agreement. Another agreement kind is a deed. Well, usually those documents you see that is sealed, they are sealed. Sometimes they have a red seal. It doesn't have to be red, but I guess most of the time it's a red seal. But the red seal is not what makes it a deed. What makes it a deed is the content. That may be debatable, but I think that is the way we interpret it. So what that means is that if you state on the document, even an ordinary paper that you would ordinarily use for a simple agreement, if you state on it that this document is sealed, the phrase usually used by lawyers is signed, sealed, and delivered, or the common seal of social organization has been affixed. That document is a deed. It's definitely a deed. Whether or not it's written on a fanciful deed, a document. Traditional lawyers write on, I guess we call it parchment. It looks a little bit bigger than the ordinary A4 paper. But these days, all those things, the size and colorfulness and the way paper looks is not what makes it a deed. What makes it a deed is the fact that the party have intended it to be a deed, whether or not they put a seal on it. Okay, that is the position of the law. Now, after the parties have signed the agreement, whether as a simple agreement or as a deed, they also have a right to enter it as a consent judgment. That means they take it to court and say, well, we want this to be entered by the judge or by the court as if it's a judgment of the court. So as if this agreement is a judgment of the court. That's what we call consent judgment. Alternatively, parties may decide, okay, we want it to be a consent award. That means they got an arbitrator. They appoint an arbitrator and say, well, you are going to enter this agreement, reduce it into an award, so that it will be as if it's a document that came out of arbitration as an award of the arbitration panel. It's an award like any other award, but it is a consent award. Let me read on. A simple agreement is usually sufficient in mediation because of the level of trust that the process would have generated, which will diminish the likelihood of violation of the agreement. A simple agreement is adequate for small disputes. So I think that's pretty clear and straightforward. The simpler the mediation, the more unsophisticated the mediation, the less need you have of making it the agreement, mediated agreement, of reducing it into a deed. So you could just sign a simple agreement. I mean, we don't want to forget an agreement is an agreement, whether it is under a deed or a simple agreement. Of course, the reason why the deed agreement under deed or under a seal, or better still expressed by the parties to be a deed. The reason why it's more powerful is that in some jurisdiction, definitely the Commonwealth jurisdiction, so forgive me, the common law jurisdiction like USA, Britain, Nigeria, Ghana. A simple agreement, if you want to implement it, your opponent in court may say, well, yes, I signed this agreement, but there's no consideration. That if you give nothing for my promise, and they may be able to get away with that agreement being nullified. But if it is a deed, if you put under this word, signed, sealed, and delivered, or the common seal of our organization is affixed, whether or not consideration was given, it becomes binding. In some jurisdiction, like civil law jurisdiction, like France, Cameroon, Chad, I would say part of Cameroon, because Cameroon is both, like Canada, is both English and French speaking in terms of the official languages. For those countries that are francophone, and I believe Spanish, Latin, other Latin countries, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and all these Latin American, wonderful Latin American countries. You may not be able to get away with saying, well, the other party did not give consideration. So you sign an agreement, they may make it binding on you, even if the other party didn't give consideration. The reason being that that part of the world, what may be more important to them is the contract. The fact that you said you would do something may make the court to make it binding on you. Well, it's for a mediator, it may be best to just make it a simple agreement, but more importantly, to make it, to let the parties know what their options are. I think that's the best, so that the minister is not choosing for the party what kind of agreement. You could let them know, look, you could sign it as a simple agreement, you could sign it as a deed, and you could take it to court, for the court to enter it as a judgment of that court. Or you could decide you want to appoint your mediator or another person as an arbitrator for the sole purpose of making this our agreement an award. I guess that's pretty clear enough. I don't want to turn this into a law class because a mediator does not have to be a lawyer. I think we should stop here for today. Tomorrow we'll continue with forms of agreement and which agreement may be best for what and who. For now, I just want to thank you for participating into this lecture. I want to encourage you to make your comments, write your comments on the area on the channel, YouTube channel where it is provided for you to make your comments, and very importantly for you to see if you could get a copy of the book, the textbook for this lecture. As I said before, you can get to read the book free if you have if you're registered on Kindle Unlimited. That's on Amazon. It's also Team Amazon. My site on Amazon also has soft copies and hard copies. So you just choose the one that is best suited for you. And please read. And most importantly, the skills we are learning here, please endeavor to apply them to the conflicts in your life and the conflict at work or in business that you are involved in or that you are called to mediate in. Thank you and see you tomorrow.